so much for coming out tonight. We are so excited to have Wendy Tanner and Alex Segura with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Wendy's debut novel, King of the Armadillos. Yes, take a pause. So just a couple notes before we get started. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards of tonight's discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Wendy will be around to sign and personalize your books. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of King of the Armadillos online using the link in the live stream description. All right, now I'm gonna bring up Vandana Pawa from the Asian American Writers Workshop to introduce the writers tonight.
Thank you. Congrats, Wendy. I hope everyone's having a good day and staying cool. I know it's very sweaty out there. But my name is Vandana. I'm the Director of Programs at the Asian American Writers Workshop. If you are unfamiliar with the workshop, we are a literary arts nonprofit organization that is dedicated to uplifting the writing and creative work of Asian Pacific Islander, diasporic, Asian American authors and writers. So we're really excited to partner on this. Thank you. Really excited to partner on this launch and celebrate King of the Armadillos with Wendy. So with no further ado, I will introduce our incredible speakers today. Wendy Tanner is the author of the poetry collections Turn and Anyone Will Tell You, editor of Embodied, an intersectional feminist comics poetry anthology, and co-publisher at A Wave Blue World, an independent publishing company for graphic novels. Born and raised in New York City, she lives in the Hudson Valley with her family. King of the Armadillos is her first novel. Alex Segura is the best-selling and award-winning author of Secret Identity, as well as the SVP, Sales and Marketing at Oni Press, and the author of Star Wars, Poe Dameron, Free Fall, and the acclaimed Pete Fernandez mystery series. He has also written a number of comic books, most notably the superhero noir The Black Ghost, the YA music series The Archies, and the Archie Meets collection of crossovers. A Miami native, he lives in New York City with his wife and children. Welcome, Alex and Wendy.
Here we are.
Yes.
Well, it's such an honor to be here at your New York City launch for this book that I feel like I've been living with in my head for so long, having gotten the chance to read it early. But now everyone can get a taste of your book. So you're going to read a little bit to kick things off?
Yes, I am. But before I do that, will you all indulge me in being in a photo? I like to take pictures of my audiences to commemorate.
It's an interactive event.
Yes.
We love it.
It's my mom moment. Everyone say armadillos.
Armadillos.
Thank you. Y'all are so beautiful. Hi, Cousin Sandy. Okay, so I'm going to start at the very beginning, just reading a little bit from chapter 1. I think there are a couple of more people coming in. Should I wait?
Sure.
Yes. Okay, we're going to begin. Chapter 1. At the ticket booth, Victor watched the nurse count out several bills from a crisp white envelope. Pushing them through a slot, she received in return 2 tickets with the destination New Orleans, Louisiana, printed in black ink on yellow cardstock. She slid them both, along with the remaining cash, into her pocketbook, for safekeeping, she said, and clicked the brass clasp shut. It was 6 days after Victor officially became a leper. He stood, rubbing sleep from his eyes under a smoke-smudged mural of the constellations: a crab, a lion, a scorpion, a bull, and a man with his arm raised, ready to club it. A silent ambulance had whisked him uptown through the dark Manhattan streets, from Bellevue to Grand Central Terminal, so early that the city was still half asleep. Already standing ramrod straight, Ba drew himself up a millimeter more. His jaw tightened, and Victor could tell his father was bothered by the nurse implying that he couldn't be trusted with the tickets. What did she think he was going to do? Run off with them and go to Louisiana himself? "Let's go," said Bob. He took the lead through the warren of underground tunnels to the departure platform, walking so fast that Victor could barely keep up. Ducking his head, he pulled down the bill of his Dodgers cap. As people rushed past, hoping they wouldn't be able to tell that something was wrong with him. The nurse boarded an empty passenger car marked restricted area, authorized personnel only. Hanging halfway out the door, she gestured for him to hurry, but Victor stayed rooted to the spot, trying to memorize his father's face, the sharp edges of his cheekbones, the sternness of his jaw, as if looking at him for the last time. The doctors said his condition was curable, but who knew if that was true? "Don't make trouble. I'll send some money soon," Ba said in Toisnese. "You don't have to," said Victor. They didn't have much to spare, not with the hospital bills they already had to pay, but Ba waved him off. "Go," he said, "before the train leaves without you." Victor looked down at his faded tennis shoes before lifting his eyes to see Ba tap his forefinger against the brim of his best gray trilby. In response, Victor stood at attention, chin up, chest out, shoulders back, and stomach in, just like Ba had taught him, and gave a full military salute, noting the twitch of a smile at the corner of Ba's mouth. "At ease," said Ba, in English. This was an old routine they'd begun on the journey from China to New York, when Victor and his brother Henry had pretended they were soldiers, and Ba was their commanding officer. It seemed to Victor now that the ritual was as much for Ba's sake as it was for his own, not in spite of the fact, but because they were both terrified, and they couldn't afford to feel it. Victor's eyes began to blur. He bit his lip and held back his tears, knowing how much it would disappoint Ba if he cried. He was sure his father wished he were tough and strong like Henry, like boys were supposed to be. He wished he were like that too. Turning to the train, he hesitated, wanting suddenly to fling his arms around his father and cling to him. But as passengers jostled one another on the platform, streaming into nearby cars, he trudged up the steps. The nurse was struggling with their bags at the luggage rack. Behind him, the click of a deadbolt made him jump when a porter locked them in from the outside. The train spluttered and puffed, the whistle sang its high, clear note, and by the time Victor and the nurse had settled on seats across from each other at the window, they were moving. Victor pressed his nose against the glass, straining to see the fast-fading platform, in case Ba was still standing there waving. But all that was left of him was the back of a man in a gray suit, getting smaller and smaller, walking away. I think that's
All right, that was fantastic. And no notes, great reading. Perfect pauses. So now we've gotten a taste of the book, King of the Armadillos, which has received so much acclaim, and we're here the day after launch to celebrate it. I'm sure you've practiced this as we ramp up towards release day, but how would you describe the book? What's the elevator pitch for someone that's coming into this without any knowledge?
King of the Armadillos.
Yes. I'm just putting on my publicist hat for you.
Yes. It's set in the 1950s in New York City and Carville, Louisiana. And it follows the story of a young man named Victor Chin, who is diagnosed at the age of 15 with Hansen's disease, otherwise known as leprosy. And he's sent to a federal institution for the treatment of leprosy in Carville, Louisiana, where he has to stay until or unless he's cured. While he's there, he is initially incredibly angry and afraid. He feels like he's been banished to the middle of nowhere. He needs extensive treatment. He needs surgery. He's incredibly unwell. But as his body begins to heal, he meets a group of other patients, and he discovers that he has a gift for music, and he falls in love for the first time. And as he becomes better, he's confronted with a choice to go home, and he has to make some very tough choices then.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'd like to step back a minute too and just talk a little bit about the journey of this book. And I know it's a very personal story for you. It's something that you probably spent a lot of time on, but I'd love to hear it in your own words. You know, how this story came together, how you knew this is the book I want to write. You know, we've known each other a long time from other industries, comics, but I think I messaged you when you broke the news. I was like, oh, we're like a publishing sibs. We're both published by the same company, Flatiron. But I'd love to hear the story of how you knew this was the book for you to write.
That was a long journey. I mean, the story of Carville is one that's been in my family and in my heart since I was a very little girl. I am an only child. I'm very close to my parents. And my dad was always very forthcoming within our home about his experience at Carville. He was there as a patient, a young patient as well, from 1954 to 1963. So he was there for 9 years, very formative years. He finished high school there. He was also, like Victor, given music lessons, piano lessons, voice lessons, composition lessons. And so the stories that I grew up hearing about his youth were very often set at Carville. So for me, they were his best stories. And they made Carville seem like this magical place, like Narnia or Oz. And it was magical in some ways. It's hauntingly beautiful. It's on the grounds of a disused sugar plantation on the banks of the Mississippi River. And there are live oaks, and there's what looks like really a college campus, tons of amenities. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, except for the fact that it's surrounded by a barbed wire fence. And the people who were there as patients were essentially incarcerated. They were quarantined. So my journey then to deciding to write the book was very long. I never intended to write a novel. I'm a poet. I've written 2 poetry collections previously. My background academically is in sociology. I didn't know how to write a novel, much less, this sort of novel, which is historical and biographical, or is quasi-biographical.
Well, the book would say otherwise.
Yes, certainly. But the material was heavily historical and heavily biographical. And, I had no intention of doing anything with it until decades after my childhood, my dad decided that taboos were for the birds. And he gave me carte blanche to write about it. It was actually when he was recovering from cancer that we were both in his surgeon's office. And he was telling his surgeon about his experience at Carville and Hanson's. And his surgeon had no idea. He didn't know anything about it. His mind was completely blown. And so my dad and I afterwards had a conversation, and we realized that this was a really important place and a really important piece of American history, American medical history and American cultural history that was essentially lost, that people didn't know about. And so he decided that if I wanted to, I could write about it. I said yes, even though I didn't really know what direction I would take with it. I just kind of went back to my social science roots. And in social science, we believe that the answer is always in the data. So I started to gather the data. I asked my dad to help me do that because he's part of the Carville family. He kind of gave me a backstage pass. He got me access to an enormous amount of archival material, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of it. Medical histories, oral histories, you name it, we were able to get it. It was an overabundance. It was too much. It was very overwhelming. And in addition to that, I had my dad. I had all of my dad's stories, and we watched documentaries together. I read everything I could get my hands on about Carville. And I initially thought I might tackle it as nonfiction. That seemed to be the most obvious path, creative nonfiction, although I hadn't done that either. But I hit an impasse. When I started to write about it, I hit an impasse around the character of Victor, our main character. He just wasn't coming alive. He just didn't have that spark of life in him somehow. And I think the reason for that was Victor was too close to my dad, and I was too close to my dad in that sense. So I had to take the character away from reality in order to find the story in it. And the real obstacle, though, that I hit that made me realize that I had to take the plunge into fiction, even though I was terrified of it, I had never even written a short story before, was around Victor's musical awakening. My dad gave me piano lessons when I was a child. He taught me how to sing, but I'm not a musician. And you cannot research your way around that. So in desperation, I tried this writing exercise where I kind of translated my own relationship with writing, specifically my own relationship with poetry, how the music of the words come to me, what it feels like to write. And I translated that into Victor's relationship with music. And all of a sudden, Victor came alive, and King of the Armadillos became a novel.
That's exciting. I can relate to this. You know, Secret Identity is a historical noir in the comic book industry, and I could really relate to what you were saying, trying to pull apart the research from the actual fiction. And I know there was a point for me where I was like, I could just keep reading these books until the end of time and never start writing, which is like a writer's dream, never having to write. So you talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to know more, like, at what point did you just say, I need to just stop? And like you talked about it a little bit, you know, opening the door for Victor to walk in, basically. But when did you realize I've done enough of the book reading and interviews and kind of secondary research, and now I'm ready to like get into the fiction of it?
I mean, I think that the process was not at all linear, you know. As a poet, that's the way we are.
Yeah. There was no ta-da moment. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, I think I began writing it and then I stopped writing it because a poetry collection interrupted the writing of it, actually. You know, what wants to come out is gonna come out. And you have to just ride those waves, surf those waves until they're done. So I wrote my second poetry collection, Anyone Will Tell You, in between bouts of trying to write King of the Armadillos. And after that, I think after Anyone Will Tell You came out, I began in earnest to really jump in to King of the Armadillos. And I was, like I said before, really afraid of fiction. So I just kind of pretended that I was writing poems. I allowed these vignettes, images, sounds, snippets of scenes to come to me. And I wrote them as if they were prose poems. And I told myself, okay, I'm just gonna collect these scraps, like scraps of fabric, and I'm gonna quilt them together later. And that's what I learned to do. The quilting process, the sewing them together, that was stuff like plot and, you know, narrative arcs and all of those, you know, structural components of fiction that took me 5 years to teach myself. Yeah. So this novel is, you know, a real sort of learning process for me.
Yeah, no, and the end result is amazing. And I do want to talk a little bit about Victor more, and specifically his relationship to music and how, you know, beautifully you describe it in the book in a way that, you know, I'm a music fan, I play a little music, but I could really just connect with how you described it and how it's so evocative. But you talked a little bit about that moment where you had to pull Victor away from your real experience, your father, and, you know, concrete people you know. How did it feel just kind of unfurling his story, and how would you describe him to someone that hasn't read the book yet?
I think I would describe him as being flawed and complicated and sensitive. You know, I think I had to make Victor myself in order to find the story that he needed to be in. Yeah. And in order to find, you know, I think there's an idealization that happens in most parent-child relationships. And certainly in this case, I felt such a deep responsibility, not only to my dad's story specifically, but to the story of the Carville community, which was absolutely remarkable. and also to the Chinese American patients who were there. Carville in the 1950s had a 15% patient population of Chinese Americans. That's a really high percentage. And yet, in all of the materials that I found, the oral histories, the documentaries, those voices were not represented. And I felt compelled, I felt a responsibility to fill that gap. And I think that sense of responsibility became very heavy, but I had to learn how to walk the line, I think, between adhering to historical accuracy and sort of paying tribute to all of the research that I did, while at the same time allowing my imagination to run free and allowing these characters who were inhabiting that world to be imaginary.
I will say it didn't feel, and this could be just my perception, didn't feel weighted by the responsibility. Like, it felt like a very lived-in story. It felt, very unique to itself, and I could relate a lot to that. This pressure sometimes that marginalized writers have, where we have to kind of evoke our trauma or our cultural trauma on the page to get it read, and I didn't sense that from this book. It felt like just a story you had to tell, and that made it feel all the more important. I want to talk a little bit about your process, because I think we were back in the green room, and I'm a big outliner. I need to outline. I need to structure and know where I'm going. I need the map. You're a poet, so you're not in that space. And talk a little bit about the writing process for the novel. I know you integrated some of your poetry writing's habits, but has it informed how you'll write the next one, assuming you're going to do another one, I hope?
Yes,
Okay.
Certainly, and I'm not going to do it this way again.
Yeah. Sing the first novel blues, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote this one from the inside out, and I think part of that had very much to do with the fact that I was learning how to write a novel. And having said that, I think that's kind of how my brain works in general. Even when I was writing sociology papers or my dissertation, I wouldn't write from beginning to end. It was not a linear process for me ever. Pieces would come to me, and I would allow them to come, and I would gather them, and then find where they fit. I would sort of arrange them, and I guess that may happen next time too, but I think I'll have a greater sense of the overall scaffolding of the story, whereas I found this story from the inside out. And maybe part of that has to do with the amount of research and also with the historical element. Like, it's almost like you have this huge piece of stone that you're trying to carve a sculpture within, so that takes some time.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, for me with Secret Identity, I didn't even expect there to be that level of research. I was like, it's comics, I know comics. 20 books later, 30 interviews later, we have a book, but it's a process, and sometimes a surprising one. I've often heard, and I love this phrase, but our books are often in conversation with other novels. Like, there's books or research that we do that kind of really rings in our brains as we're working on these books. Are there any other works that, I don't want to say influential or inspirational, but books that resonated with you as you were working on this book?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, I think every book has other books that feed it, but for this one in particular, my touchstone, and this was from the very beginning, was Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. I read it for the first time when I was in college, maybe when I was 19 or 20, in an effort to better understand my dad's experience at Carville. And in this book, I kind of pay homage or tribute to it in a few ways. You might find some Easter eggs in it if you read it and if you know the Thomas Mann, but certainly the beginning and the ending are train journeys, just like the beginning and the ending of The Magic Mountain, which is also about a young man who goes to a sanatorium, one for tuberculosis in that case.
That's great. You're a poet. We both write in different spaces. I write comics, I've written other things. I'd love to hear a little bit about how just being versatile in what you write and how you write it was helpful to you in putting the novel together.
Yeah, I mean, It's interesting. I think that poetry allows me to tap into my subconscious very deeply and to just allow that to flow. And comics, my work in comics, my husband Tyler and I have had a publishing company for independent comics for 18 years now. We started it the same year we got married. And I think learning about comics and the process of telling a story in that medium taught me about storytelling. There is a very explicit form of storytelling that happens in sequential art, where you really need to lead your reader, you lead their eye. And I think that taught me to have a little bit more structure, perhaps. So, pulling from both of those threads, I was able to kind of braid them together into what turned out to be fiction.
Chaos and order.
Yes, yeah. The golden mean.
Yes. I'd love to talk a little bit more about, we talked about Victor. I want to talk more about, if you can kind of give us a quick run through of some of your favorite supporting cast members or characters that stick with you. I always find that there's always 2 or 3 characters that I didn't plan on being my favorites, and they end up coming up and becoming so integral to the story. I am an outliner, but sometimes I leave enough room to allow the characters to breathe and surprise me, and those are the most pleasant and organic moments, I think, when a character just comes to life and starts doing stuff on the page. So I'd love to hear about some examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sam and Ruth storyline really has my heart. And a lot of people don't like Sam, I think, but he's very meaningful to me. So Sam is Victor's father, and he is technically still married to Victor's mother, but they have been separated for many, many years due to the vicissitudes of immigration, Asian immigration legislation at the time. And this was a common story. It was not just specific to my family or to Victor's family, but it was a very common part of Asian American history and culture, Chinese American history and culture as well. But Sam has also been in a relationship for many years in the States with a woman named Ruth, a Jewish woman named Ruth, who lives across the street from his laundry in the Bronx. And Ruth is also a wonderful character to me. She has enormous empathy. She is Victor's pseudo stepmother. She takes on that role. Sam, one thing about Sam, Victor's father, which is perhaps unusual for a Chinese laundryman in our culture, and whenever that is displayed in films or television or books. Sam is very, very hot. That's part of who he is as a person. He is smoking hot. And I think that we don't often think of Chinese laundrymen or Chinese hand laundries as being romantic protagonists or the sites of love stories, but why not?
Yeah, why not?
And so that's one of the things that I want, one of the stereotypes I think that I wanted to push back on. When was the last time that we saw a love story in a laundry that featured an Asian man? It was My Beautiful Laundrette in the 1980s with Daniel Day-Lewis.
All right.
And it was set in the UK. So that was the last time. So I wanted to blow that up a little bit.
Good.
Just a little.
I've been very selfish and hogged the mic and asked you all my questions, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask Wendy questions about this wonderful book. So raise your hand and don't be shy. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to ask more about how, you said that you pretended you were writing poetry first. I'm obviously very interested in that. So if you would just say more about how poetry informed your move into fiction.
I'm just repeating it for the live stream, but she wants to know how poetry informed your move into fiction.
I think actually it emboldened me to go into fiction because in poetry, as you know, Caroline is a poet. Part of the process for writing a poem is to dive into the unknown and to allow the poem to take you to places that you're not expecting, to allow for the ugly to come out, to allow for surprising associations to come out, to find meaning as you're making it. So I think that emboldened me to go into the unknown of fiction.
Questions?
Comments, critiques?
All of the above. I have more. So as someone who runs a publishing company, I could relate a lot, having worked in publishing on the other side. And what were some of the challenges of allowing yourself to just be the writer? When you're usually dealing with everything else, like the logistics of it, the publicity, the marketing, the sales, distribution, all these kind of backstage stuff that is complicated and stressful. But in this situation, you are the writer.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's freeing. It's incredible to have this machinery behind
system,
you.
yeah.
This incredible system. But it's also a learning process. When you know how to do something a certain way, and then you're presented with a totally different institutional model, there's always going to be a steep learning curve. So getting used to not having all the information all the time, getting used to not calling the shots, getting used to not making the budget, getting used to not booking the tour. All of that was very new to me.
It's nice though.
Yeah, it is
It is
nice.
nice, I have
It
to
is nice. It's different,
Yeah.
but it's nice. Yeah.
Back there. Yes.
When did you settle on a title? Did you know this was going to be the title the whole time? Was there a working title? Do you have several titles?
The question is when and how did you settle on the title?
I knew this was the title from the get-go.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know how. It just came to me. I mean, armadillos certainly are not just important as a metaphor in the book, but they are actually the only other creature besides human beings that are able to contract Hansen's or leprosy. So they were used in research, and they play an important symbolic role in the book because armadillos obviously have this exterior armor, but in their susceptibility to this illness, they're also very vulnerable. So in many ways, they are like our patients. In many ways, they are like Victor himself, who has been through a lot of trauma in his life. Even before his illness, he has seen war, he has seen famine, immigration, separation from his mother. He is a boy who has learned to roll with the punches of life from way before he got sick. So his journey in the book is also about reintegrating himself, and he is able to do that by tapping into his art, by tapping into his music.
Yes.
You mentioned that with the character of Sam, you wanted to push back against certain stereotypes or tropes. Can you speak a little bit about what other tropes or conventions around genre fiction you consciously wanted to engage or subvert or push back on?
That's a great question. The question is about subverting or pushing back against tropes in genre fiction and how you did that in your work.
Yeah, I mean, another stereotype or trope that I wanted to push back against around illness was around leprosy in particular, as an illness that is so heavily stigmatized and so misunderstood. Those kinds of illnesses have a tendency to dehumanize its sufferers and reduce them to their disease. So by portraying Victor and everyone at Carville as fully human, I wanted to allow readers to see that they are far more than their circumstances, just like all the rest of us, that they have the same wants and needs and hopes and foibles, mistakes, and the need to deal with the consequences of their mistakes as anyone else.
We have time for a couple more. I have more. I'll just use my opportunity to ask you all the questions I have. I want to talk about Victor's character arc without spoiling anything, but we start from a place of anxiety and fear on his way to Carville, and then we kind of see that very insular world become filled out. You know, he becomes very lived in, and I just wanted to hear in your words what it was like kind of narrating that.
Wow, that's such a great question.
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. Oh, I mean, I think that Victor's story is a story about the ways in which we numb ourselves emotionally. And of course, the illness that he has, Hansen's disease, results in the numbing of the body. So his body becomes numb from his illness, but he's already made himself numb in order to survive all of the things that he's been through. So his recovery physically goes hand in hand with his recovery emotionally. And that's, I think, what takes our character arc over the rainbow, as it were.
Yeah, no, and it works out really well. It doesn't feel heavy-handed at all. It feels very organic, which is what you want. We have time for a couple more. Yes.
At what point did you figure out that that was his character arc? Did you always know, or was it in the process of taking as you said, the pieces of fabric and putting them together that you realized?
The question is at what point did you know that was his character arc in the writing?
It was totally in the process, and actually that aha moment came to me when, as I was previously talking about, when I made the connection between my own relationship with poetry and Victor's relationship with music. At that point, I realized that his journey had to be emotional as well as physical, and that it had to be tied together through the discovery and growth of his art.
One more? Yes.
So I'm just going to ask the question I just want to know. It's not about the book, which is, how does it feel to come back and talk about this book just blocks away from where you went to high school?
How does it feel to come back and
Amazing.
talk about the book?
You know, there are so many familiar faces in this audience. It's extraordinary. And I'm not just talking about my family, but there are people here that I haven't seen, like yourself, in decades. People that I went to school with. I went to school right around the corner. And there's also one of my old beloved teachers here, Vivian. So how does that feel? It feels incredible. It feels like a homecoming. It feels much like the kind of homecoming that I think my dad must have experienced when he went to Carville. We went to Carville in 2016 together on a research trip, and that was his first time back in 53 years. Wow. He had never gone back after leaving. And it was a beautiful experience, and I'm feeling that tonight, guys.
What are you working on next?
Okay, well,
Let's go from joy to stress.
Yeah. Oh no, this is not stress.
Okay.
This is something else. So my next book is a very large departure from the historical fiction realm and from the drama realm. It is a satirical comedy.
Okay.
And it is called MILF.
Sign me up. Unless there's any other questions, Wendy, thank you so much for this. It's been a pleasure. I'm so happy for you. Thank you for letting me talk to you about your book.
Thank you so much for this, Alex. It's such a pleasure to get
Anytime.
to talk with my friend about this.
I'm really fast just going to shut the lights off and turn them back on before we officially wrap up, because I noticed it's flickering to the start.
Okay.
Make it dramatic.
There we go.
Anyways, thank you all so much for coming. That's all good, Wendy and Alex. I am just coming up here with a few last reminders. I know many of you picked up a copy of the book when you checked in, but in case you didn't, we have plenty of copies of King of the Armadillos available for purchase up at the register where you checked in, as well as Alex's book, Secret Identity, which I know he talked about a bit during the event, so please feel free to check that one out as well. Wendy will be signing and personalizing books at the alcove next to where you checked in. My coworker Elise is going to point right now to where that is. It's a little bit hidden, but it'll all make sense in a moment. We just ask that you grab all of your personal belongings with you and line up down the center aisle, kind of curve around to the wall. Otherwise, thank you both so much for doing this with us. Thank you to Vandana and the Asian American Writers Workshop for co-sponsoring this event. That's all. Thank you all again for coming out tonight.